On June 14, 1998, a horrifying tragedy unfolded at a bar in Gangnam, Seoul, South Korea. The establishment, known as Sabai Bar, would soon become the site of an unspeakable nightmare. At approximately 2 a.m., a taxi driver patrolling the streets of Seoul in search of passengers stumbled upon a grotesque scene. Outside the bar, a woman lay sprawled on the pavement, desperately waving her hands. Her upper body was drenched in blood, and she was nude from the waist down. The driver, paralyzed by shock, managed to call the police, relaying the grisly sight before him. Officers were dispatched immediately. The police followed a trail of blood that led down a narrow staircase into the basement bar. A suffocating metallic stench greeted them as they descended. Inside, a vision of horror awaited. The owner of the bar and two of her acquaintances lay lifeless, their bodies butchered. The woman who survived the tragedy, Miss Chae, barely made it out of the bar and is the only witness to the gruesome events that took place. That evening, the owner's sister had been covering her shift at the bar. Around 10 p.m., 3 male patrons entered. They sang lyrical ballads and appeared to be polite customers. However, by midnight, the owner had returned to take over, and that's when the nightmare began. According to survivor Chae, she was drinking alone in a room at the bar that day, when suddenly the bar owner and two of her acquaintances were brought into the room by 3 criminals, tied up with cable ties. The men demanded the owner hand over her gold necklace, and when she refused, they savagely stomped on her and beat her. As she begged for her life, one of them drove a knife into her mouth and tore it brutally up to her ear. The criminals mercilessly hacked the owners and her acquaintances to death with a knife, then shook the bodies' heads to check whether they were dead or alive. Then they left, saying, "They're dead." After that, Miss Chae heard glass breaking and water running outside the room for about 10 minutes, and the criminals apparently fled, saying, "Let's go quickly, there's no time." Chae was stabbed in the neck and side with a knife, but fortunately, the wounds weren't near vital points and she miraculously survived. The criminals turned on the water to destroy all the evidence at the scene, so the floor was flooded with water. And to make it difficult to collect whatever evidence was left, they crushed glass cups and plates and sprinkled them on the floor. They then wiped off the fingerprints left on the furniture with newspaper before running away. The police worked hard to collect fingerprints and other evidence, but they could not find the criminals' fingerprints, and DNA testing was difficult with the technology of the time. Also, it was 1998, so CCTV was not widespread, and it was difficult to find witnesses because the World Cup was held that day, and everyone across the country was watching the soccer game. Chae vividly remembered the motive the criminals had told her. When the criminals threatened her with a knife, she pleaded for her life, saying, "My husband is currently undergoing brain surgery, so he can't work, and I'm barely making ends meet with the daily wages I earn from working at a restaurant." However, at that time, one of the criminals demanded money, saying, "We're in the same situation as you because our company was shut down, and we don't want to be like this either." He actually took $60 in cash, as well as the victim's jewelry and credit cards. Chae later recalled that the knife the criminals used was unusual. It was longer than a regular kitchen knife, and it was white, shiny, and very thin. When the police investigated the knife, they found that it was a knife used to cut nets to rescue oneself when caught in a net while diving. The police said that the knife was one issued to members of the Airborne Special Forces, and its unique feature was that it had serrations on both sides. While the police were investigating this case, they discovered something very unusual. The criminals were already in possession of the tools they would use to commit the murder at the time of the incident. If a murder is committed accidentally or wasn't planned, the murderer usually uses whatever is lying around them as a weapon. But in this case, they committed the crime with weapons they brought with them and tools that had to be prepared. For example, an unplanned murder weapon might be an ashtray, a fire extinguisher, a liquor bottle, or a kitchen knife. Not only had the criminals already prepared a murder weapon, but they also brought cable ties with them. Who would normally carry cable ties into a bar? In the end, the experts concluded that the criminals were not ordinary people, but people who had likely committed murder in the past. Professor Yu Song-ho of the Department of Forensic Medicine stated his opinion that, based on the state of the victims' remains, they seemed to have received professional training in murder. In addition, the police found a rubber thimble on the floor at the crime scene, which the police believe the criminals accidentally dropped. It was found that this rubber thimble is mainly used by workers in factories that manufacture electronics and by workers in bookbinding factories. In other words, this was potential evidence that the criminals may have been workers in electronics or bookbinding factories, but this wasn't enough to identify the culprits. The police created a montage of the criminals and spread it around the country in hopes of catching them or getting some information. But despite their best efforts, this case has remained unsolved for 26 years.
My name is Sarah, and I'm from Bangladesh. This happened when my husband and I went on vacation with some friends. We visited a sea beach to spend the weekend. It was a beautiful place. Since I was newly married, it felt like a honeymoon. We had a great day, full of laughter and sunshine. That night, one of our friends, Jason, threw a party in his suite. He had come with his wife Tina, but earlier that afternoon, he told us that she had gone back to her hometown because her mother was very sick. It felt strange, especially because he didn't seem worried, and he let her travel alone without telling anyone sooner. But we brushed it off and went to his party anyway. There were 5 of us in the suite that night. We talked, played games, and told spooky stories to scare each other. My husband and I were having a great time. Jason, though, was drinking heavily. After a while, we took a break from the games just to sit and chat. That's when it happened. While everyone was talking, I froze. My eyes locked onto something in Jason's bedroom. My husband noticed right away that something was wrong. He leaned toward me and asked if I was okay. I answered as calmly as I could. Yes, I'm fine, even though I wasn't, because I knew what I saw. A few minutes later, after trying to calm myself down, I leaned over and told my husband I wasn't feeling well and wanted to go back to our suite. Some of our friends tried to convince us to stay, saying we wouldn't all be together like this for a very long time. But I gave my husband the look, and thankfully, he got the message. Once we were back in our suite, I began to panic. I told him I hadn't brought him back because I was feeling sick. I brought him back because of what I saw in Jason's bedroom. While we were watching TV in Jason's suite, I had been facing the hallway. There was a dim light on, just enough for me to see into the bedroom. At first, I was just glancing around, but then something caught my eye. Tina. She was sitting on the floor, by the wall in the bedroom. Her eyes were open. She was staring straight at me, not blinking, not moving. At first, it was blurry. Then I remembered my glasses. I had taken them off earlier, so I quickly put them back on. That's when I saw her clearly. She looked frozen, like a statue, but her eyes were locked onto mine. I felt this sharp, icy chill crawl down my spine. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to startle anyone or risk making things worse. When I told my husband, he was in total disbelief. He argued with me, reminding me that Jason had told us Tina was out of town. He asked why I hadn't said something sooner. I told him the truth. If I had said something right away, you all might have confronted Jason, and what if he had a weapon? I grabbed his phone and dialed 999. The police arrived quickly. They arrested Jason without incident. None of us could believe it. Jason? Our friend? It didn't make sense. But the truth came out during the investigation. Jason had a drinking problem. Tina had tried to help him for years, but he would become violent. And earlier that night, when she confronted him about drinking again, he snapped. They argued. Tina threatened to leave him, so Jason grabbed a knife and stabbed her in the head. She died instantly, and he just left her there. He partied with us, joked, drank, and all the while, Tina's body was in the next room. Jason was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. To this day, I still get chills thinking about Tina's frozen eyes staring across the hall, watching us from the other side.